Hi guys, my name is Alexandra and I am a member of Adbinar marketing team. It's a pleasure to welcome you at 5th Adbinar and I hope you all are having a great day. We can start maybe with a little bit of a warm-up. I would like to give you some space for other people to connect. So I would share some exciting updates and news related to our software Adbinar. First of them, you can already see on the presentation, and our app is now both on Google Play, but also on App Store. So choose QR code based on your device, and by scanning it, you can download our app in one click. That's very fresh new. So you can find it right through the QR code. Second new is we have a design of our new report ready and uploaded exclusively for our community. We are currently programming them, and if you would like to comment on them or give us your feedback and influence their future design, please join our community. You can see the QR code for our link tree in the corner, and you can comment below the post based or designed for this report. We will be very grateful for your feedback and for your for sharing your needs directly for these reports. Another update is that we are working on AI integration to model the entire tree from the video. For freestanding individuals, it will allow to model the whole tree, including the crown, and can completely replace photo documentation and camera calibration, which are both time-consuming. And last new is that we are already processing videos of our online training at Adbinar Academy. So if you're interested in using our app, please contact us directly now by booking a call with my colleague Ellie, and she can give you the onboarding in person, and the Adbinar Academy will be released soon, hopefully. And here you can also see our social media, which we would be very happy if you join us on the platform you use the most or that suits you the best. And we are uploading upcoming events, more details, our development and social content, such as case studies with our software. We have already 3 of them, and 4th is ready to be released. So if you use Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, doesn't matter. We have all of them and being active there. So let the conversation between us be active, even on the webinars, but also in the social world, in applications. And I think most of the people that were waiting to be connected are here. So I think we can officially start. My name is Alexandra, and I'm very happy to welcome you here to our 5th webinar. The topic is Uncovering Banksy's Tree, examining its story and tree pruning. Thank you all for spending your time with us today. And let me quickly introduce you to today's schedule so you know what's coming up. We will dive straight into the fascinating story behind Banksy's Tree, of course. I'm very thrilled to host Lawrence-Thor Stephen, CEO of Thor's Trees, who oversaw the pruning process, and James Chambers, Principal Arboriculture Consultant and CMA, who has extensive experience with the tree in arboriculture as such. It will be followed by James's presentation about managing trees and managing expectations in the urban environment. And of course, there will be space for questions in the end, so don't hesitate to write questions in the chat. We already tested that it works, so we will be reading them during the webinar, and I will save them for the Q&A section. And of course, also stay tuned, because in the end, after the Q&A section, I will be really revealing the next webinar speakers. And also, I will release a registration link before it will be on our socials. So wait for it, and you will be the first to know also the topic for our already 6th webinar. Thank you again for being part of our community. And now let me give a word to our CEO, Andrei Kolerik, who will guide us through today's discussion and introduce the topic about Banksy's tree.
Hello, Alexandra. I'm happy to be here today. I will just quickly share my presentation. Hopefully this time it's not gonna freeze my screen. So give me a moment. In the meanwhile, just sending warm regards from Taiwan, Taipei, where I spent the last several days talking with local tree experts and with technology guys. So it was very, very interesting for me. And so that's one of the reasons I'm looking so tired. But the second one is I already have well after midnight. So hopefully I will be able to stick until the end of the webinar. We were thinking how to best introduce today's topic because it's a little bit of street art, a little bit of graffiti, and a lot of tree care. So we figured that the best way would be if I introduce the street art and graffiti part, and then I discuss with James and Lawrence the connection with the trees. So, of course, we will be talking about Banksy's artwork, but I would start with a more broader topic, such as who is Banksy? And when I was thinking how to introduce him the best, I figured the best way would be to introduce him through his artwork directly. So you might recognize some of these artworks, such as Girl with a Balloon. As I mentioned, he's a street artist, so most of his work is directly on the streets, on the buildings, in forms of graffiti. He's often trying to comment of very political or discussion-sparkling topics, such as same-sex marriage with these famous cops, also social media influence. I think a lot of his artwork is directed through wars and peace in general. This is also a nice artwork of soldiers spraying a peace sign on the wall. This is one of my favorite, pointing out the destruction of the wildlife in general. And this one is actually in Kiev, Ukraine, and it really gives some David against Goliath vibes. This piece is also from Ukraine, or from cities destroyed within Russia-Ukraine wars. For example, this piece is directed or was released during the migrant crisis almost a decade ago. And these two pieces are located in Gaza Strip. So as you can see, his artwork is very distinctive, very, I would say, provocative, and can spark some interesting discussion. This is also one of my favorite pieces. If graffiti changed anything, it would be illegal, which obviously is. But I would say one of his greatest masterpieces is to stay in anonymity for so long, because he started his work in early 90s, so it's more than 30 years now. And he started as an artist in Bristol under a name of Slick. He was, I would say, regular graffiti artist, but he quickly figured out that this might not be the best way, because, for example, graffiti piece like this takes several hours to be produced. And when you decide to put art or to spray on some public property, you usually don't have several hours. So he figured the fastest way would be to use stencils to prepare the art at home and apply it very quickly somewhere on a public wall before it draw too much attention. And also this is a quote from Banksy himself, that most artists have an obsession that defines their work. Monet had light, Hockney has color, I've got police response time. So this gives you some context on how Banksys operate, but I would say the best story to describe his work is from October in 2013, when he spent 1 month in New York. I have a short video to show from a YouTube channel, Brandon FM.
The graffiti artist known as Banksy is setting his sights on New York. He plans to spend the rest of the month making the city his canvas.
October 1st, 2013, midnight. Away from home, Banksy planned to terrorize the streets of the Big Apple for an entire month, creating a new piece of art every 24 hours. Illegally, of course. Night 1. Fittingly, Banksy starts his escapade by painting 2 kids grabbing a spray paint can out of a sign that reads, "Graffiti is a crime." Once this piece was confirmed to be by the man himself, all hell broke loose. Citizens of New York started going block to block just to find his next piece of work, and the NYPD would begin to run around like headless chickens trying to catch Banksy in the act.
To be honest, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because the thing is they're here and then they're gone.
Night 5. Banksy creates a scenic jungle environment in the back of a dirty abandoned white truck. He dubbed it the Mobile Waterfall. Night 9. Things took a slightly more serious turn. Tucked away on 159 Ludlow Street, a car was repurposed to paint a commentary on the 2007 Iraq conflict, accompanied by WikiLeaks audio of US soldiers killing innocent civilians and 2 journalists in the crossfire of war.
Hey, I need to get the brass to drop ramps. I got a wounded girl. We need to take the rough to mile.
Oh, it's their fault for bringing their kids to a battle.
That's right.
Night 11. Banksy let loose a stuffed animal slaughterhouse delivery truck that toured the meatpacking district for the following 2 weeks. The YouTube video that accompanied the stunt was aptly titled Sirens of the Lambs. Night 13. A stall was set up in Central Park, managed by an old man. The only thing for sale was 100% original signed Banksy canvases for $60 each, meaning countless people passed up on $60 art that now sells for hundreds of thousands. Night 31. On the final day, Banksy recreated his bubble tag with real balloons near an exit sign, signifying his departure from New York. A perfect way to end his vacation and a successful NYPD escape.
Art, is it vandalism? I will let you be the judge, but right now let's discuss one of his latest artwork in London. So I would like to invite Stephen and James to join me for the discussion.
Hi, Andre.
Hello, James.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah. Hey, Lawrence.
How you doing, Lawrence?
So,
hi, Lawrence.
Yeah, we can hear you, we can see you, everything good. So let me, guys, start with a question. What was your first reaction when you find out that this specific tree was composed into this street art? Maybe Lawrence, could you start?
My first reaction, honestly, I was in shock. I was in absolute shock because, well, first of all, I didn't even know that it was us that did the tree in that moment. You know, it was actually my colleagues, some of the tree surgeons that work within our organization, who brought it to my attention. You know, the WhatsApp group just went super nuts, and everyone was just super engaged and super excited. So I was in shock. I didn't believe it at first, to be honest with you. You know, and then it all sort of just it was just crazy. It was a crazy moment.
Yeah, and was the reaction mostly positive, or was there so many second thoughts, like like some second thoughts on how the pruning was done or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, every part's exciting because you know, like any publicity is good publicity, you know, kind of, but not. In context, I think the word "in context" is going to keep coming up throughout this whole talk, really. So I'm always excited. You know, I'm passionate about this industry. I'm passionate about arboriculture and everything around it. So after I got over the it's all going to be okay, and after my wife sort of calmed me down, as after the management team here sort of just said, like, calm me down. We just had to tread lightly around this industry, you know. So, but yeah, no, I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I must agree, because it really wasn't just arboriculture industry, but news outlets all around the world was reporting on this piece. So it definitely started some discussion also outside the arboriculture. James, can you add what was your initial reaction on this one?
Yeah, it was very interesting. It was twofold for me, because I used to work at Islington many years ago, and I remember the tree specifically because of an incident we will go into later that took place while I was there. And I was also interested in the art side of things, because obviously art is in the eye of the beholder, and I wondered what was the message that he was, or what messages was he seeking to send with this image. And of course, the other thing is the scale of the story, which seemed to roll very quickly across social media, with lots of people expressing different opinions from different points of view, with you know, everyone's viewing it through their own prism, if you like, and they all have a different understanding of what's going on. And I thought that was very interesting.
Definitely. And were you guys aware of Banksy's works before this incident, or how involved you've been with all the graffiti and all the street art he did?
Well, I've seen some of them, and some of the ones you showed today I've not seen before. So I you know, I'm aware of them, but not closely following, for example. And I think he does some great work. And yeah, I was quite intrigued by some of the ones that you showed earlier, Andre. They were good. I hadn't seen several of those before.
Yeah, he actually, you know, I think he has more than thousands of pieces, you know, all around the world. So these are just the top ones I could find, but there are so many more, you know. During the lockdowns, there were so many good ones around London and so on. You can just quickly Google it and make sure yourself. How about you, Lawrence? Did you know about Banksy before?
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I've known of Banksy for 4 years, and you know he's quite well, he's an internationally recognized artist, isn't he? Really, street artist at that. But I think, you know, street artist is just a division. The fact that he's an artist, he's going to go down with the Picassos of conversation, isn't he? Really, you know, like given the magnitude of conversation that this guy can bring to the world, you know. Is quite fascinating. So he's an amazing guy. You know, everybody has haters. Everybody's got something negative to say about everyone. But the fact that he's bringing conversation to very important topics around the world, you know, around a broad spectrum of subjects is just fascinating. And it's something that I've also always appreciated, and now I'm a part of. Right. So.
Yeah, definitely. Like you can argue that he's one of the, or if not the best known living artist today, you know, like when you really think about it, I personally cannot think on anyone, you know, more famous. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting story to uncover.
It's interesting to think, what was he saying in this example? What do you think he meant? What do you think his points he was trying to make? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, like me personally, when I first saw it, I was, for me, it was pretty clear message of how we are losing greenery in the cities. But, you know, it's definitely from my point of view. So different people can see, as you said, different things in the artwork. So yeah, that was definitely my reaction on what I saw. But could you guys maybe walk us in the story, how you were involved with the tree, what were the specifics, maybe if this was the regular pruning of a regular tree, or if this tree was somehow special. I would maybe ask Lawrence first, because he was the last on the side before this artwork.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I do have to mention at the start, you know, I said to you guys offline that I do have to caveat this conversation to all the viewers and anybody who's going to watch this, is that in a way that, you know, I'm not talking on behalf of Islington. You know, I'm just talking on behalf of a contractor. You know, I've got a huge respect for Islington. They're a magnificent borough, and they have an amazing team around them. And I wouldn't want to sort of like stand in the way of representing the amazing team that surrounds the arboricultural team of Islington Borough. So I'm nothing that I say today is in any way representing Islington's views or Islington's sort of comments. This is all just me. And I know that James feels the same way as well, being that he used to be a colleague of many of the people that work there still.
That's true.
So I forgot the question now.
Yeah, so your story of the involvement with the tree, like if it was somehow different of the pruning style and the tree itself before there was any artwork around it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so us as contractors, we truly understand that there are many reasons to prune trees. You know, sometimes we prune trees for insurance purposes, whereby we're not particularly sticking to what would be considered, you know, British standard style pruning. And then there are other means where we're pollarding, or where we may be just doing light pruning works in and around the borough to sort of like free up infrastructure, pruning away from lamp columns, crown lifting canopies, removing epicormic growth. So there are so many reasons why we prune trees, you know, for the boroughs that we work in. So we very much trust the work specifications that are given to us by the tree officers or by the surveyors in and around Islington. So we tend to not question, we tend to trust more so, and we work as a team. Every now and again we do give back some feedback, or we have some comments that we like to throw back to the tree officers just to assist us or aid us in in how we prune these trees. This specific tree, since speaking to my colleagues about it, in my mad panic of saying, why was this tree pruned like this? That the tree officer who was working on this specific was very specific on where they wanted and how they wanted the tree to be pruned. So given that, we fully trusted that, that this tree was given quite some thought. It's very, very, very rare that we get told to prune a tree in this particular way by an arboriculturalist, by someone who is qualified, by someone who has diagnosed and understands the physiological and structural considerations that this particular tree has, that our trees have. Don't get me wrong, we do much work for the domestic industry, like homeowners and stuff. Like, I think about 40% of our revenue is homeowners and sort of like B2C clients. So when we get instructed by a B2B client, like a local authority or a borough, we trust that this has the process of planning and thought, careful planning and thought has gone into why we're pruning it, versus just Mrs. Smith who's saying, can you just take it down to this height? And we're like, are you sure that, so, and when we're in that situation, we have to sort of like coach our clients or educate our clients toward the benefits of heavy pruning or internodal pruning and what they're asking for versus, pruning to British standards to encourage a healthy, balanced crown and healthy regenerative growth.
Yeah, so definitely understand your take. So James, I believe you have some more information about why this pruning style was chosen. So could you share with us your take on this?
Well, I don't know the specifics of this job, but I do know that the tree was damaged illegally many years ago when I was working at Islington. And just to clarify again, just to continue what Lawrence said there, obviously I don't speak for Islington. I have not worked there for 10 years now, but I did work there for a long time in the past, and I remembered this tree. I know the team that work there now, and they're all dedicated professionals who know exactly what they're doing. They're really hard-working, decent people who know exactly how work should be organised with trees. And of course, as soon as an interesting event such as this, where it becomes a big press story, the people who are directly involved with the situation are not able to discuss it. They're not able to speak about it. And whatever you think about that detail, it's understandable that a local authority would want to control what's said on their behalf. And so it makes sense that they wouldn't be able to speak directly or explain the situation. And of course, as soon as we see a story like this, as it grew very quickly across social media, and we see lots and lots of people expressing different opinions based on perhaps one photo, they don't necessarily understand any of the background or any of the details that inform the decisions that are around this tree. And so the story runs off on its own, really, doesn't it? It becomes a bigger story about what people think. And of course, if they don't really know any of the history of it, then they're not fully informed. So this tree was significantly damaged. I'll talk about this more when I do the presentation later, but it was damaged. We assume we know who did it, but it's a complicated story. But and so that's once a tree has been cut in the way it has been cut in the past, that to some extent informs the future works. You're limited to what you have to work with, and also I understand. I must point out I haven't seen the tree personally for some years, so I'm talking about from my last time I saw the tree would have been, well, I can't remember, it was years ago, in person. But I understand it's also developed some basal decay, in which case the pruning works will consider that, because obviously, as you will understand, when you have a tree that has decay, you have to consider how the work you're going to do is going to affect potentially affect the stability of the tree or otherwise. And so that's a strong consideration. And I don't know to what extent the tree is decayed at the base, but it has been damaged, and damaged more than once by third parties, shall we say. I will talk about this some more when I do the presentation, because there's some more information, but with photos and things.
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, also the artwork was actually damaged by what you presumed was the same person who damaged the tree many years ago.
I will show you that as well. Yes, exactly. That's true. So there seems to be a pattern forming, but of course we have to say I don't have any direct evidence about this, so it's fair to say that perhaps a complete stranger jumped into a private garden and removed the branches from the tree and then ran away. Who knows? We can all come to our own conclusions about what actually happened here.
Yeah, true. It's all possible.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, do you have any more information or any discussion on this topic? For example, another question came to mind. If, for example, Lawrence, if you approached the work the same way you did after it sparked so much interest on social media, or would you be more hesitant if you came to the same situation again? Or in other words, does it change anything for your practice that the tree gets so much attention and this, I would say, pruning on this particular tree?
Not really, if I'm honest with you. I put full trust in my team and my clients. We as I say, we know that there is a pragmatic approach to good arboriculture within the borough. I know for a fact, as James does, that the tree team and the tree officers that work within the borough are so passionate. So every now and again I hear whispers of these tree officers don't know what they're doing, all they care about, and it's all and utter. I'm not going to swear because I'm renowned for swearing on webinars, and I'm not going to, but I am passionate about them, and I know for an absolute fact that these guys are true professionals, true people who are passionate about the borough that they work in, and they continuously professionally developing themselves. And I'm telling you now, as a contractor, when something doesn't quite look right from a pruning perspective or specification perspective, they will very, very quickly hold you accountable as a contractor because of how proud they are of the borough that they represent. So and this very, very quickly could have become like a PR nightmare. You mentioned earlier, like, what was my initial thought? I tend to thrive in chaos, so I was actually a little bit excited. I'm the type of leader that sort of thrives in chaos. A lot of my colleagues and a lot of my peers mentioned that to me. I walk towards danger sometimes, so it wasn't an uncomfortable space, but I did have to be very careful on what I said, what I didn't say, more importantly, who I spoke to, how I spoke to them, what their intent was. You have to tread very lightly, and also you have to ignore a lot of the comments that are going to come through about, as James mentioned, people who don't know the specifics about the job are all going to come up with their opinion. One of the things that I think I saw on James mentioned and really stuck to me on LinkedIn, one of the LinkedIn posts that he was backing us up as contractors was, you ask 5 tree surgeons what they should do with a tree, you'll get about 8 or 9 different answers. Everybody has their opinion, everyone has their take. I recently did my PTI. And we were in a room of some seasoned arborists, and we're going through the process of surveying trees and giving our recommendation of works based on the structural integrity of the tree and the physiological ability that we predict. And you'll be surprised how many people in that room, even though they went through a full-on educational piece from the teacher, you know, some people had very different outcomes as to what they would have advised. Some people would want to remove it because they thought it may pose too much of a risk. Some people, like myself, would have looked to retain it for as long as possible, you know, and try and benefit from the greenery and the canopy, and the benefits that tree provides to the community and the people around it. So it's fascinating to me. The good thing, what I love, is that it sparked the right conversation, an exciting conversation around urban arboriculture, arboriculture as a whole. Everybody's welcome and everybody's going to have their opinion. But it truly excites me because there, in my opinion, has never been a time in the whole of in history where arboriculture and environmental care has been more important, has had to be the subject of conversation. You know, trees and all vegetation and greenery in the environment is such a big part of the conversation as we move through this climate, economically, socially, you know, and all such subjects. So I'm just super excited, and I'm still am. You might be able to tell. I'm just super excited I love trees. I love tree care, and I love being one of, you know, the UK, one of the leaders of tree care in and around London.
Yeah, we can definitely all agree on this one. Like, whatever you think of the tree, whatever you think of the work which was done on the tree, it definitely sparked an interesting and important discussion about tree care and about urban environments in general.
Certainly did.
Yeah. So, guys, do you want to add anything on this topic, or should we just start with James's part on the tree pruning?
I could say more, but I think perhaps save it. I'm
super excited to see James's part. I've been looking forward to this bit for the last few days. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this next part.
Yeah, me too, definitely. So yeah, cool. Thank you guys for this part. And James, I would ask you to share your screen and take us through the topic.
I will do. Thank you very much. When you asked me to talk about this, I was thinking about the best way to make this an interesting conversation, and I thought that none of this is going to be it's not rocket science, it's not new news, but it may well be that many of the audience haven't thought about some of the points that I'm going to raise, and this is about my experience and generally the experience that particularly tree officers have to deal with when managing trees in the public realm for a local authority, because there are so many different considerations and different aspects of that work that perhaps not everyone will realise initially. It's not as simple as just cutting a tree if it needs to be cut. There are a whole variety of different aspects, as we've seen with this story. So the same thing applies with the Banksy tree, if we call it that now, although it's actually on Google Maps now as a Banksy. It's on the mapping system, so it's been recorded. A good friend of mine said the other day, is it now the case that the arboricultural manager at Islington is also a curator of art? That's an interesting question. And if so, should he be paid more, I wonder? So many people don't really necessarily care about trees in their local environment specifically until something happens. You know, a tree is pruned or a tree has to be removed because it's damaged. You know, until the tree becomes an issue, they don't necessarily feel strongly. But then you can be sure that many people feel very strongly about trees once, you know, when an issue arises. Everybody has an opinion, as we've said already. And one of probably the most used phrase when people talk to tree officers is, I love trees, but, and then they finish that sentence with whatever the issue is that they are concerned with. And when we hear about trees in the media, sometimes it's good news, but more often it's bad news. It's excuse me, following a storm, for example, or something like that. You don't see a headline that says, yesterday there was a 90-mile-an-hour storm in the city and millions upon millions of trees didn't fall over. You never hear that. You hear about the one that did, and that's obviously understandable. That's the one that captures people's attention, particularly if there's some awful damage or some tragedy, if somebody's been hurt by a fallen tree. But what that doesn't tell the story about all of the trees that haven't failed and all of the work that's been done to keep those trees as reasonable condition as you can. And there are a whole variety of ways that's done. In the past, it's been done almost by luck and default, where you just deal with the trees that go wrong and leave the others to their own devices. But more recently, certainly in the last 20 years or so, there's been much more, maybe longer, but been much more programmed maintenance, where people plan ahead and organize cyclical works, that sort of thing, general maintenance rather than reactive works. Because effectively, people, generally speaking, they want trees something like this. Those are the types of trees people like, and really not trees like this. These are the kind of trees that we'd prefer to avoid. So if you're looking to develop a tree strategy, a management procedure for how you're going to look after the trees that you manage, there are different ways to do that. There are general ideas about that, one of which comes from, some of you may be familiar with Piglet. And as you can see there, if you think about it, if you suppose the tree isn't going to fall, then you're okay with that. And this refers back to risk management. If the first thing we think about any tree is what if it falls, and we're already thinking about the worst possible outcome, then every decision you make has been coloured by that. And so I think that's something to consider. But a slightly more realistic way to manage trees would be to record them. So you survey them. You have your professional council ARB team, or consultants. Consultants are tree officers are consultants for the council. They're all professionals. They know what they're doing. They understand about trees as much as any of us do. They know what they're doing. They can come up with a plan. They can record the information about the tree, look for issues that might cause a problem in the future, record that information, and then if you've got this sort of data, you can use this in a whole variety of ways. You can plan maintenance works. You can share it with the public so people can see what species of tree it is outside their house and when it's due to be pruned and that sort of thing. That kind of information is very useful across a whole variety of situations. You can record information about, say, the different age ranges of your trees, so that you can identify where there are gaps in your tree population and plant more trees, so that you're always going to have a similar spread or increase the numbers of trees over the years. And you can use things like iTree, which I'm sure many of you will be aware of, where you can identify and quantify the environmental and ecosystem services, the benefits that the trees can provide. Because as you touched on, Lawrence, earlier, this is more important than ever with the climate crisis, and how the benefits that we require and that we get from a tree population is extremely important. You can look at your species distribution, and you can look where you may have a tree species which is threatened by a recently discovered disease, or there are many pests and diseases which affect a variety of trees. If you've got one species if you've got too many of one species which may be at threat because of a new pest or disease, then you may have to introduce different species and build in resilience to your tree population by having a good variety of different species, so that, like as what happened in the UK years ago with Dutch elm disease, the elm population, which I'm told were among the tallest trees in the country, and there were millions of them, within a very short space of time, they pretty much all gone. Now the rare elm trees are very rare. There's still a few around, and we've got resilient species that have been planted, but the landscape, no doubt, quite radically changed as a result of Dutch elm disease destroying so many trees in such a short space of time. So you can try to prevent situations like that when you've got good information about your tree population. You can also you build in tree policies which will describe what you will and won't do, for example, about your tree population. And once this is agreed and ratified by the local authority, it's really helpful, because you can explain that, for example, you won't cut a tree purely because it blocks light. You'll look at the tree and assess it on its own basis and see if that's a reasonable thing to do, if the tree work is reasonable, or to allow TV signals from satellite dishes. These are genuine complaints that we receive as tree officers all the time. Birds mess on your car. People want you to cut down a tree because a bird has produced mess on a car underneath. Obviously, this is not really a very reasonable request, but people who ring in to request that think it is. And sometimes they appear to expect that you're going to just go out and remove a tree because their car is dirty. It sounds like a joke, but it's actually true, and it happens. Those similar kind of things happen quite often. And if you have got a policy which clearly states that, then you're not having to argue with people when they call in. You can politely direct them to the policy, and you can explain why that's not a reasonable thing. You can say, if a bird is sitting on one branch and you cut that branch, it's going to sit on another branch. There are other options to resolve problems like that, and tree removal isn't really a positive thing to do, particularly in the middle of a climate crisis, but it's not really a sensible thing. Of course, if you've got a street with 100 trees on, and half the people in the street say, I want you to cut down a tree because of birds' mess, then you lose half of those trees. It doesn't make any sense to manage tree stocks like that way. And having a good policy is a really good way of dealing with that. Just as a quick example, I've got a few examples about experiences I had in the past. I remember I was at a public meeting with many residents who were asking for me to arrange for the heavy reduction or removal of some large trees close to where they lived because they couldn't get good TV signals. And so they asked me that, and I explained that wasn't going to happen. That wasn't, it wasn't an appropriate way to do trees. And obviously they immediately scoffed and felt very upset about that. But when I explained to them, if you think it through, you're paying a provider for a TV service. They've put the receiver for that TV service next to some trees, and then they've told you need to keep paying us, but you need to go and tell someone else to cut their trees. So I explained to them, you're paying for this service. We're not going to cut the trees. I would suggest that you go back to the people you're paying and say, you need to put this receiver somewhere where it can receive a signal. There's no point in putting it somewhere where it's not going to work and then asking someone else, a third party, to resolve the problem. And to be fair, they did listen to me, and they I don't know what they did after that, but they weren't angry with me anymore. They realized that what I was saying made sense, and it's useful to have a policy that backed that up. So it wasn't just me saying it. I could point that out, and they understood the situation, which I think was very, very useful. And of course, if you've got all your trees plotted and you know when works are required, you can program in the work, and so it's not a shock to people. If you know that you're going to be removing a tree, for example, because it's diseased or decayed or in some way dangerous and it needs to be removed, you can let people know in advance, and so it's not a great shock. You can talk to them about replacement trees. You can talk to them about why the work's being done, and that reduces your complaints and reduces the problems that you're otherwise likely to have, because they don't come home and find half the trees gone, or all the noise that they might otherwise be unaware of. All of a sudden, it can be quite a shock to the system. As I mentioned earlier, people will be understandably concerned if a tree directly outside their house suddenly disappears, or if they wake up one morning and hear a noise of a chainsaw outside their window with no warning. It's understandable that people will be upset by that kind of thing. So you can preempt those kinds of problems by involving the public and explaining to them how and why things are going to have to happen, and talk to them about how you're going to replace that. What can you do in the future? Will you plant a new tree? Would they like to have some input over what species of tree you plant? These are the kind of things that tree officers do, and this is something again that obviously the crew at Islington are doing this kind of thing all the time, and it's a really positive impact. Then you've turned a situation that could be a real negative into a positive situation which the public will be engaged with and happy about. Most of them anyway. And of course, having your trees surveyed and recorded means it offers legal protection for you as a tree owner, because there's always elements of, there's unpredictable nature of tree maintenance. Trees are subject to the forces of nature, as we all are. And so despite our best efforts as tree managers and tree consultants, we're expected to accurately tell the future in all cases. But of course, that's not always possible. So all we can do is make our best judgments based on our experience and our understanding and our knowledge and our skills and our education about trees and how they behave, and the additional diagnostic tools that we might have, and try to avoid problems like you can see in the bottom left where a tree falls over and damages a car. But we cannot prevent these. All we can do is intervene where we feel that it's justified to do so based on our understanding. But there will always still be cases where even a perfectly healthy tree can fail without any warning. And even a tree that's already on the ground, someone could trip over that. So, there's no such thing as a safe tree. We have to just manage and balance the risks that trees present against the benefits that they also provide, the essential nature of that. And so having this kind of records does provide legal protection. Some of the tools we use, for example, we do dynamic load testing where we test the stability of trees. We use an anemometer to measure wind speed locally, and trees move around, and we can test their stability and provide a safety factor. We do decay detection in trees where we put sensors around a tree and determine an image of what the consistency of the wood is in the base of the tree. Or another example there of a similar thing where you can see where there's good wood and where there's decay, so you can understand whether the tree is still structurally sound enough to be retained. Does it require some maintenance? Does it require crown reduction work, perhaps like the cherry tree in the Banksy tree was pruned? That may have been the reasons why that tree was pruned. There are micro drills, similar another tool that you can use. It's sometimes just a simple mallet and a screwdriver is enough to tell you that something's wrong with the tree. You can tap a tree and hear that it's decayed, and that might be a clue, but you can also hear that there's good wood there. So these are basic tools that we use. And of course, there's the Adbinar system, which is a much more advanced tool, which I don't need to tell you, Andre, but this is a wonderful quite new tool where you can use calibrated photographs, 3D scans. You can incorporate tomograms into the calculation, give a safety factor, a calculated safety factor through that. So this kind of technology is really very useful indeed, and I think that. These are the tools that the professionals use, and these are, tree officers and consultants who are the same thing, really, and using these kind of continuing to advance our understanding of the biomechanics of trees and the physiological condition. And when we come to a tree and make an inspection, we all make some kind of an assessment of the potential risk that tree might provide. And effectively, we're looking at the same things. We're looking at the features in the tree. We're assessing whether or not there's something that we feel is a potential for a failure. Let's say a branch or perhaps part of the trunk or perhaps the whole tree might be affected in some way. And we have to consider what will happen if that does fail. And of course, we have to consider we'll be equipped to make a decision about which is the most likely part. Let's say a branch looks damaged and it might fall onto the road, so we can make a decision about where is it going to go. You can see where it is, you can see where it's going to go. Those two things are normally fairly straightforward, but of course the one thing that is always an educated guess is the likelihood. How likely is that problem to occur? What's the risk of that happening? And we have those three things: the part, where it's going to go, and the likelihood. And these are two examples of two really good systems that help you to quantify that risk and show that you've used a measured, calculated approach. You need training to use either of these systems. They're both very good. I'm trained in both. I'm not going to estimate one over the other. They're both very good systems, and they work in slightly different ways. If you are involved in tree inspection for safety and risk assessment, and you don't use one of these systems or a risk assessment system, I would recommend highly investigating these and see which of these might work better for you, because again, it's a measured and clear process that you go through. You can demonstrate that you've considered all the relevant factors, and so in the worst case where you've decided that the tree doesn't need work and you've got a record of your calculation and something then happens and goes wrong, you can show that you've made that decision, because we're not able to predict the future. We can only make that decision, and we don't always get everything right. But if you can demonstrate that you've used a careful, calculated procedure to get to the conclusion that you have, then that gives you some level of protection, and it's a really good way to help make those decisions. It's really a useful tool. Of course, they don't always work, because regardless of any risk assessment system, sometimes unpredictable things happen. So this is an experience that I had many, many years ago now, and I still talk about it because you can see it's quite a significant experience. This is a very large branch that's crushed some play equipment, and the reason, well, it's blind luck that there weren't children, little toddlers, on that play equipment, complete luck. And I'm very glad that they weren't, of course. But this tree, you can see from that edge of the branch, the torn end of the branch, there's no decay there. It's true to say, in fact, there's no decay in the crown. It didn't even break at the end of a branch. It's part of a fork of a branch. There's no cracking in the branch before that. It's true to say that if I had been standing next to that tree at the time that the branch failed, I still wouldn't have been recommending any work right up until the point where the branch failed. There was nothing to indicate that was a likelihood. It was a very fortunate situation. I was almost lynched when I went to look at the tree, because all the parents of the children who went to the nursery were obviously upset, as anyone would be. But there was no fault, as it were, in this situation. There's no defect in the branch. It's not decayed. There was no damage prior to this branch falling off. And of course, we were asked why this had happened, and you can't really say for sure. That most of us will be aware of the phenomenon of summer branch drop, but that's not something that we can explain in great detail reliably. So we were not able to promise that this wouldn't happen again. And so, of course, unfortunately, this led to, you can see the weight of that branch was very significant. It would have been awful. So we had no real alternative, because we couldn't ensure that we couldn't produce any evidence to say that this will not happen again. So we had to remove the tree. That was the only option in that case, which is, unfortunate from that sense, but at least nobody was hurt. That's the main thing. I put that in there to describe the difficulties that any tree assessor might have, particularly tree officers who are looking at huge numbers of trees every day, to manage them for risk and to do the best they can by the people and the trees. You've got to have balance from the benefits that the tree provide. This tree provided lovely shade, which the children needed in the summer. It was very healthy. It didn't have anything particularly obviously wrong with it. Didn't have any diseases. Didn't have any decay, and yet this incident occurred, and thankfully no one was hurt. But as I mentioned, that was blind luck in that case. Even with all the expertise we have, still there will be unpredictable events, and this was a good example of that. And speaking of our expertise, it's really important that we consider what we say and what we do when we are talking to people about trees, and don't step outside of our areas of expertise, because there are areas which we're not qualified in. So recently, for example, I was asked to attend and talk to some residents, not as a tree officer, but in some of my role, where as a consultant is similar in many ways to the role of a tree officer. And I was asked to attend and speak to some residents about some trees they wanted pruned because it was blocking light. So when I got to site, I explained I'm not really an expert in lighting or shading or any of these things, but it's just possible that there are other factors involved. So when the residents were all telling me about how these trees were blocking light, I was puzzled for a little while, but that was their opinion. And so I explained that there may be other factors, and these trees were protected, so's the building. So we applied to the local authority to have the top 2 floors of the building taken off, and we are waiting to hear back from them. Another example of a situation I dealt with many years ago, where this is a tall building, as you can see on the right, and you can see the aspect there. So the sun rises behind the building and travels around to the south of the building. But when I attended site, the people's concern was to prune these trees across the other side of the road, which I'm sure do shade to some degree during the day, but this wasn't going to affect their lighting in any significant way. But they were consumed by this idea that we have to have those trees pruned. This is the sort of opinions that tree officers have to deal with on occasions. And, I'm not criticizing those people. They obviously were unhappy about that. But it's not realistic to prune these trees, which will then produce more growth in order to try and resolve lighting issues when the building is actually the way that the land is shaped and the way the building is there. It's not really very helpful. Another example here, you've got some pear trees that were planted probably a couple of decades ago, maybe a bit more now, in one street. And in amongst these pear trees were about 6, which mistakenly were planted, and they produced very large, very heavy pears every year. And we used to get complaints from people about these very large pears, really big and heavy pears, which on at least one occasion broke a car window, and which would fall from the tree and land on the pavement and then leave a mush there until the street was swept. So there were lots of complaints, and after a while, after a few years of several individual complaints, the local councillors asked us if we could do anything about this. So we came up with what we thought was a reasonable plan. We would remove 3 of the trees and in the autumn or the winter, and then replant in that same year 3 trees in those positions which didn't produce that fruit, and then when the next highway cycle came around, in a further 3 years, we would remove the other 3 that produced the fruit and replace those as well. Seems perfectly reasonable. However, when we announced this, or shortly after we announced this, it must have been a slow news day, because there was nothing else on the news in the BBC in London on that day, and all of the callers to radio phone-ins were talking about these trees and how we were butchers and we were ruining the environment and we were devastating the area, and look at these gorgeous trees, what's the point of removing the trees, it's crazy. All this kind of similar sort of reaction to some of the things we've seen with the Banksy. And all the people who had been complaining about the fruit were suddenly silent. None of those people spoke out anymore, and now everybody was complaining about the idea of removing the trees. So the councillors called me back in again and said, well, is there anything else we can do? And so you can understand this. It's not a criticism. They were trying to manage a situation where they had people complaining. And in this case, what we did was get the contractors to go back and remove the fruit when it was there. When the trees came in, when the fruit was growing on the trees, they removed the fruit. We actually gave it to the residents, and they began producing jams and chutneys and things like that. So a very happy ending, very interesting story. But of course, there's no headlines about the people in the street being really pleased with the work that we'd done. You never hear about that, but that's how that story ended. So all the headlines were about the negative impact. Just to come quickly back to the Banksy tree, as we've discussed earlier, it was damaged, we believe, by one of the tenants in the nearby block. This image appears to show that the windows are right next to the tree, but that's not actually true. If you look at it from this angle, I've got some Google Street Views here, you can see that it's actually not next to the windows. It's set further back. Lawrence will know this, having been there to the tree himself. It has been pruned in the past. I can't remember the detail. It was a very long time ago, at least 15 years ago. But effectively, we received some inquiries from at least one resident in the block who said they wanted this tree pruned back because it blocked light. We said it's due for routine maintenance in however long from then it was, and so we're not going to prune it now. And then within a day or so, it was heavily damaged on the side next to the properties. And so, of course, as we mentioned earlier, who knows? It could have been some random stranger, but whatever happened. And that will have, and just to show you, this is a different angle. This is there are other trees in these gardens as well, some of which you might think may block more light. Just to show you a few more images, you can see that the building behind the tree will also shade those windows as well at some point. So it's, shading isn't in itself a reason to remove or to heavily prune a tree. Just to show you a couple more images here, you can see that the tree has been quite heavily pruned in the past, and I'm sure this relates to the damage at the base of the tree. But what happens now that this tree has become part of an art piece, if the council decides in the end, if the officers decide that this tree has become so decayed, it may be a few more years from now, it may be that the decay spreads at the base, and perhaps the right thing otherwise would be to remove the tree. But will that be even possible now? That will be a new bone of contention, won't it? That will be another issue. Council vandalizes art form or something like that. It's difficult to find some balance in situations like this when many of the people who are voicing their opinions don't have all the information. You touched on it, Andre, as well. And to show you this picture, you can see behind the tree where the other thing to mention is a friend of mine mentioned the other day. Another good friend mentioned about the way the green paint has been splashed on the wall. Perhaps he's making a comment about greenwashing, which is a very interesting view. I thought that was a very interesting point that a friend of mine made. You can see here behind the tree, where on the wall there, if I show you another image, this was the night. This was the next day after the Banksy had been put there. You can see that some of the paint has been ripped off, and there's these splashes of white paint. Again, I'm not an expert on paint splashing, but it looks very much to me as though the person was standing in the grounds there and throwing paint up against the wall. And as I mentioned, who knows? Maybe it was the same person who lives in the building. Maybe it was the same mystery person that vandalized the tree and then vandalized the Banksy. Who knows? You have to come to your own conclusions about what you think is more likely there. This is just a quick example of some pollarding that was done regularly at another site where I was involved. And despite this work having been done over and over many years ago, this is pollarding, by the way, and that tree was not pollarded. The Banksy tree was not pollarded. That's not pollarding. It's a reduction. And obviously the specifics of that were what they were, but pollarding is a different action, which some of you will be aware already, is removal of pretty much all of the wood on the crown, and that was done originally for hundreds of years when wood was a crop. So these trees have been managed in that way for however long before I was on site. But when I went to arrange for this work to happen again, the trees to be repollarded, the residents were outraged by the very idea. And so I tried to explain that as these trees continue to grow, you might end up with branches falling into the grounds. So we made some suggestions with the residents about perhaps thinning the pollard heads. So, it's a negotiation. We were talking to people about how these works might be carried out. There's some street trees, and this is not an example I'm aware of personally, but these trees it's not true pollarding, but they are sort of high pollarded, and they've been managed in that way. And you can imagine how you can see from the knuckles at the top of the crown where these trees were pruned a year or two before these photos were taken, and they're probably done regularly because to manage their size in the street. That's why we prune trees. You manage to manage their size for whatever reason that might be, and perhaps this sort of cyclical work is announced and publicised beforehand so that people are aware it's going to happen. And perhaps it's relating to controlling water uptake of these large trees. Who knows? But it's a cycle of works, and you can imagine that people will have different views about that as well. Some people won't like the trees after they've been cut. It does look very harsh. Everyone can have, and you can understand that opinion whether or not you share it. You can see that why people might feel like that. Here's some very interesting work I've been involved with recently, where these in a park where some these ponds, they wanted to let more light into the ponds, and there were a lot of young trees around the ponds in order to improve the conditions for wildlife, newts and the like in the ponds. And after some discussion, it was agreed that these trees will be effectively pollarded, these young trees, rather than just removed, which is a wonderful idea. Because, as you can see, some great work has been done here, and these trees may now become pollards and be the pollards of the future, because pollarding hasn't been done regularly and en masse for hundreds of years, and it's really important to consider that this sort of work is what's led to many of the veteran trees we have now. And so it certainly has its place. It still has its place. And here's an example of some other trees that were also pollarded in that park just a few weeks ago, which are already beginning to produce new leaves. And an example of a veteran tree walk that I'm lucky enough to be involved with a group who delivers veteran tree walks. And you can see in the background there some trees which have been topped effectively. I mean, it's not strictly pollarding, but the reason it was done like that is so that some of those trees will produce new growth and become pollards, and hopefully live on into the future. And this is interesting to have that discussion with the people on the day. Pollard trees have got their place. There are some old, this is another job I was involved with a while ago, where a large veteran pollard with lots of decay and wonderful habitat values was threatened by development, and the local people were obviously very upset about that because it's quite a prominent tree. You can see it's been damaged, it's a wonderful tree, and after a lot of public consultation, the council decided to refuse the scheme, and that tree is now still there. Here are some other examples of some really old veteran pollards. The reason I like to go on about pollards is because one of the main reasons we have so many veteran trees, particularly in the UK, is because of the pollarding that was done for so long. And it's just an interesting thought to consider when these trees were being regularly pollarded because the wood was used as a crop for either, for burning, to cook, and so on and so forth. Were there people then who were complaining about how the trees looked after they were managed? Perhaps there was a town crier shouting in the town hall about leaving these trees alone. Who knows? Perhaps there was a scroll written with complaints about why the trees were managed that way back in those days. Or perhaps people, you can imagine, even they would have looked harsh even in those days. People may have had different views about how the tree looked after it was done. I think one of the really important things is a tree that's called Old Knobbly. And this was pollarded many years ago. It hasn't been managed for many years, but trees like this wouldn't exist without the pollard trees that when they were younger, when they were managed in that way. And that's an important consideration. And of course, here's another tree, Bigfoot. This one's called. This, again, another huge pollard tree, which now people will travel across the country to spend some time talking about and stand around and admire it because it's such a wonderful example of an enormous and really important tree. So pollarding on the one hand makes people outraged and very upset, and on the other hand, people will travel across the country to see a pollarded tree. So it's just worth considering all these different variables here. And there's just a picture of a tree which I thought was quite remarkable, with a lovely face, looks like some sort of voodoo doll. And that's thank you for your attention. That's my presentation. So we can go back to the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, James, for your educational presentation and many interesting pictures and examples. I would like to ask if maybe Lawrence wants to add anything or comment anything that was said in the presentation, maybe.
All I've got to say is, wow, that was definitely worth the wait. I thoroughly enjoyed that, James. That was awesome.
Thank you.
I kind of feel like if this is going to be posted for view later on, I'm going to be getting a lot of people to just watch that, because I feel like every arborist, people class themselves as arborists, but actually they don't truly know. They're just tree surgeons, or they're just tree cutters, and if people just took a little bit of time out to truly understand the history, the importance, the benefits, the all the other factors around trees, from new planted trees all the way through to some of those ancient pollards that you showed us, and the benefits to what they bring to the community and society. It's unreal, and you've just managed to encapsulate that in that short sort of 30-minute toolbox talk, or 30-minute sort of mini seminar, I want to call it. And that was really good, James. I really thoroughly enjoyed that.
That's great. And I think really one of the things I really wanted to try and get across as well is just to think about how, from my own experience that I listed there, where the instructions I was being given changed from the councillors, changed one way to the next. And that's not a criticism of them. It's because of the reactions that people were providing. And what I'd like to encourage is I'm talking to the wrong audience for this, in a sense, because we all know about trees to a different extent. But if we have members of the public who just leap on a story such as this Banksy story, and as you touched on earlier, Lawrence, they just consider, the council, they don't know what they're doing, or the council officers don't care about trees. That's such nonsense. Tree officers become tree officers because they love trees. That's what their passion they have before they get into it.
They certainly don't do it for the money, do they, James?
No, exactly. It's a hard job. They don't do it for the grief you get from people. I mean, I used to, as I said, I did it for many, many years as a tree officer, and I loved it. But a lot of the time, you're dealing with complaints from people about trees, and often you're getting complaints about the same tree. Somebody saying, "I want this tree to be cut down because it blocks light," or whatever it might be. And somebody else saying, "How dare you even prune that tree? It's so beautiful. Why don't you leave it alone?" And they're talking about the same tree. This is another reason why having a policy and a strategy is so useful, because it gives you a really good balanced approach to dealing with these kinds of situations, and something that you can fall back on, you can refer to. It's like a safety net, if you like, when you're talking to people who are feeling very angry for whatever their particular reasons might be, and you can say, well, this is the policy we have, and these are the reasons behind the policy. You can consider it. You can be more balanced about it, and some of them will listen and take that away. Others won't. They still won't care. But you can't please everybody. But at least you've got a clear and balanced approach when you have that sort of a system.
Absolutely, and even to just add some narrative and context around the decision, that what made you get you to that decision, whether it be you speaking about public concern, whether it be about you leaning on policy, whether you be leaning on there is always a reason why we're doing something. I learned something not long ago, a while ago actually, that all pruning is damage. You don't. That's
true.
All pruning is damage in some form. And if we, don't be wrong, we all prune trees for different reasons. We get instructed by our clients to prune for so many different reasons. But at the end of the day, you've got so many specifications. You've got client-led specifications that may be frowned upon, but it's exactly what they're requesting. You've got scheduled maintenance works that are there to prolong the benefit that particular tree has within that environment. You've got pruning for light, you've got pruning for space, you've got pruning for safety, you've got pruning for fruit or flower. Sometimes there's so many reasons why we prune, and it's very easy for I don't know if you found this, James, but that it in the past, and I'm trying to sort of change the way that people's sort of natural mode of attack is that rather than support and look into the way and why people do things, they're just some tree surgeons, in all these silly places like Arb Talk, for example, and what have you, are very quick to attack people for their decision that they've chosen to make, or poor pruning. When actually, if they ask the right questions and if they educate themselves just a little bit more, a tiny little bit more, just put yourself on that short course. The Arboriculture Association, for example, is a great place to start on just going on a tiny little 1 day, 2 day, 3 day short course, where you can learn so much and grow your knowledge. You may find that some of your opinions that you had in the past are no longer applicable in your new way of thinking.
That's true. That's learning, isn't it? That's absolutely true. We shouldn't be stuck in our ways. We should be open-minded to learning where new information and how we can apply that. And you're absolutely right. You said there earlier, a phrase I've always used is every cut to a tree is a wound. And, that's absolutely true. And if it's a really young tree and it's a small snip and the tree grows over it in no time at all, it doesn't matter. But if it's a big old tree or even a mature tree in a street, and you have to take a big branch off the tree, then that's going to cause problems in the future. And so we don't do that lightly. We make careful decisions. I used to be a tree surgeon as well, many, many years ago, long time ago now. But it's important to make a decision about every cut you make, And we don't do them for, well, most of us don't do them for nothing, as you were touching on there. Sometimes people may look for the easy option and just cut the nearest bit that they can rather than reaching out to the end. But it's important that we understand why we're cutting the tree in the way that we cut the tree, because that's going to have an effect, and it can be reasonable or it can be negative, and that depends on so many other factors: the physiological condition of the tree, its time of year, all of these sorts of things. I think actually someone said to me earlier that some of the complaints that were about the Banksy tree was they thought that the tree would die and it wouldn't have any more, wouldn't grow back. But of course, we've seen this tree has been pruned many times in the past. It has grown back. I'm sure it's actually grown back already. It will have already produced some new growth, and so that's the kind of thing people don't really understand, I suppose. If they're looking at that snapshot, they just see a tree that looks quite bare, and it does, or it did rather. That's true, but it doesn't mean the tree is dead, and the tree has been cut before in that way. The tree is going to grow back, and of course, as I mentioned, now of course it's an art piece as well as a tree, so it may have to be managed differently in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on another note, when people instruct a good contractor, I consider, I might be slightly biased, but I consider Thor's Trees to be the best tree care company in London, so but we everybody who works here, everybody who's part of my team are maybe not as passionate about trees but they are passionate about their job. They do truly, we are so particular on who we have work within our organization, our team leaders and our climbers, and the way that we push go take our groundsmen all the way through their progressive professional path toward being a climber. They take great pride in the work that they do. It's don't get me wrong, you do get those cowboys that just cut and just want to be paid, and there's that minority in every industry. But most tree surgeons love the feeling of pruning a tree or doing some work. It's an art form in itself, pruning a tree anyway. But getting down and looking up at this tree and being like, I did that. Do you know what I mean? And then watching over the next 3 months to becoming a year to a year and a half, as you drive past that tree, as you probably did when you were a tree surgeon and when you were a tree officer as well for Islington, and as you probably do now, seeing how that tree responds to the magic that you created, that you did in that moment 3 years ago, to see how it responded, and then going back 3 years later maybe and pruning it back to shape, or getting it back into some sort of getting it back into the same condition maybe as what you did it to last time. We're all passionate as tree surgeons. Most of us are so passionate about our craft. It's very rare that you'll find someone be commissioned by a local authority, contractor, professional to do such bad damage,
That's true. And again, people who are not really passionate about it won't last long in the industry because they won't be doing good work. And I think that's just to reiterate again that, as you know, tree officers are in the business because of their love of trees. They are keen to do the right thing. They want to do. They're professionals. They're looking at the whole of that wider range of considerations that I mentioned earlier about the whole of the tree population. They look at every individual tree and they look at how that tree fits into the population and the range of different species and age ranges and so on that they've got within their tree population, and how best to grow that and to allow it to increase its longevity and remain healthy for as long as possible. And it's worth just remembering that in a situation like we have with the Banksy tree, the tree officers who are involved, who know all of the information, who make these decisions, their voice is not heard in these kind of in the public furore or whether it's good news or bad news. The tree officers who actually make these decisions and are hard-working professionals, their voice is often left out of this, and I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to comment, have that little bit more freedom to comment on the social media. I don't really get so much into it, but when I saw that, I thought it's important to just try and redress that balance. When I saw lots of other people saying this is awful, what have they done, which based on one image that they don't really understand.
It's this. I mean, and it's exactly the same for us contractors as well. You know,
Yes,
I had to tread very lightly on what I could say, you know, and who I was talking on behalf of. You know, as I said at the start, you know, I'm in no way representing the views or opinions of Islington Council. This is purely just me as an independent contractor, you know, and how we represent our clients and what we do for our clients. But yeah, I mirror that, mate. Like the passion, the professionalism, the consistency of service that these tree officers work in their jobs day in, day out. Like, you know, we as contractors put our trust in them to make the right decisions, and they put their trust in us to carry out the works to specification as to what they've requested. So, and as long as we do that, with good arboriculture in mind, I feel like everybody's going to win.
I'm in the privileged position of knowing a lot of London tree officers across all of London through the LTOA, the London Tree Officers Association, and I can tell you that, as I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear, that passionate and professional, decent, hard-working tree officers are what we have all the way across London. In fact, all around the country. As we've touched on, you wouldn't be a tree officer just for the money. You wouldn't be a tree officer just because you want to arrange for trees to be chopped down. You go into the business because you care and because you're interested in trees and because you care about the environment. And I think that's an important thing for people who don't necessarily consider that when all they see is a single tree which they have an opinion on. They don't realise how it's got to that position and what's been involved beforehand.
And us contractors, you know, especially Thor's Trees, we are constantly on the lookout for consultants, tree officers, local authorities, contracts that are just as passionate, if not more passionate, about good arboriculture, because it's what we champion here in my organisation. In this organisation, we love working with trees. We're always looking to build on relationships. And don't get me wrong, we do it. It is a business. We do make money from it, but actually it's a win-win for everyone, because when you do it right, it's an absolute win-win. The contractor wins, the client wins, and the universe wins. You know,
which is great.
Okay, maybe I can join you. And I saw a question during your presentation, James. Simon asked if is it not the case that topping a tree to such extent, Banksy's tree, will only increase the amount of dysfunctional sapwood available to decay fungi, making matters worse, not better?
Yes, that's a possibility. But the alternatives, when you consider the tree is still providing value, and it's not considered, obviously the risk of that tree failing has been assessed, and the work will have had that consideration in mind. So you can either say the risk is so much and you just completely remove the tree and lose any value that it may have otherwise, or you can undertake some works which, as you mentioned, it's not going to help with the damage, but it does help with the structural stability of the tree, in the sense that the tree has a slightly smaller crown, so there's less wind forces acting upon the tree. So it's a balancing act. Some people may have decided that they think the tree was the damage was too significant, or perhaps they would consider that the way the tree would look afterwards, they wouldn't be happy with that. Those are other decisions that other people can make, but the tree still has value. It still offers ecosystem services, and it's an established tree. Just to briefly mention that again, with older trees, they always provide more benefits, even if they're not particularly old. That cherry's not old, but it's an established, significant tree, and so to retain that tree in a reasonable condition where it doesn't present an unacceptable level of risk, undertaking a measured amount of work in order to balance that risk with the benefits it pays, I think is a perfectly reasonable option. And so yes is the answer, but that it's done in a balanced way. So it's better to have a tree that might look a bit harsh after it's been pruned than to have no tree, or to have a young tree which will then take many years to establish before it provides the benefits that that tree currently provides. Do you have any? Are there any more questions? Oh, you're muted, Alexandra.
No, I actually only saw this one,
Okay.
but maybe I think Lawrence, you agree? You gave the heart, so.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But Simon has a good point, and that is the other side of the conversation that is well worth having and discussing, and should always be considered. When pruning, as we mentioned before, like any form of pruning is damage, to the tree. We're forcing the tree to push energy and resources towards something that may not have had to be done, but then actually, if you look at it on the other side of it, what's the alternative? Potential failure, there's and obviously with it being right on the side of a highway as well, there are other potential hazards that or risk to the situation. So, but I do think that Simon's question is a great question, and it's one that constantly comes up with this Banksy tree. And I know for a fact that was a consideration when before the tree officers initiated the specification of works.
Yeah, it's one of those things that that's part of the profession, really, is trying to make the best decision you can with all the information you have about the risk benefit analysis, really. And that's, the tree still provides benefits, but it does present a risk, and now that risk has been managed to an extent where it's acceptable. Doesn't mean there's no risk. The tree could fail. I mean, as we've seen in some of the pictures I had, but it's much less likely now. And if it were, then it's very unlikely to damage the road because it's smaller. The crown is smaller. All of those things are considerations that were made at this time, and that's applies with not all, but most tree management. You're looking, not all trees have defects that are really obvious straight away that you feel you need to address with a risk management option, but you see trees managed to manage their size, like that line of plane trees I showed earlier, and that all of those trees will be damaged to some extent by that pruning. But it's a balancing act between the extent of the damage, which comes back to the expertise in the pruning that Lawrence was talking about, and if you can minimize the damage that's done to trees by the type of pruning, to at least to some extent you can not excessively damage them when they're pruned well. And of course, it's always a balancing act between the benefits that the tree will provide and the work that you do.
Yeah, we got another question from Dan. Was the tree pruned this hard due to sorting out the damage inflicted by vandals, or was it because of the basal decay, or both?
I don't know is the answer to that, because as I say, I've not been there for a long time. I left there 10 years ago, but I imagine it was a combination of those things. The tree was significantly damaged. I honestly can't remember precisely, but as I say, it was probably at least 15 years ago that the tree was first vandalized, maybe slightly longer. And it has been managed in the past, as I showed in those pictures from the Google Street View. I suspect it's probably a combination of all of those factors that led to that recommendation being made.
Yeah, I mirror that. I personally don't know enough information about that to know the facts. And as I say, I'm not here to talk on behalf of Islington, but I could imagine that, knowing what James has told us, knowing that there is basal decay, knowing that there are some structural potential considerations that we need to consider as a matter of reducing the risk, and I would say it was probably a combination of both. Again, great question by Dan. I think it's a good point, and one that keeps on coming up, and one that unfortunately, because some people can't talk, that we may never know the answer, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions. Maybe I would like to ask our listeners to maybe write them if they have any, and to not hesitate. Probably you said everything or your insights for this topic, and don't have anything more. Or I think you could talk about it for more longer, but yeah, it's
Yeah, I think you can. I think we can all like sort of sense the passion that both myself and James have
yeah,
for our
definitely.
craft. Do you know what I mean? And James being what I consider myself to be like an OG. In my terms, I say OG being like original gangster, someone who's worked their way through the ranks of groundsman all the way up to tree surgeon all the way through to tree officer through to consultant. You know that I'm still an infant in my game, you know, although what Thor's Trees has created and what the team do here is phenomenal and magnificent, something that I'm always proud of. I'm still an infant compared to what James has gone through. But it's inspiring to have someone who's still this passionate, you know, after decades of being involved in this game, to still be involved to this nature of trying to spread awareness, educate others. You know, I'm grateful to have even been invited to be able to be here on this webinar, but two, to be graced by James and everybody who's even just watched this webinar today and thrown in these awesome questions that are coming through. You know, it's almost reignited my love for the industry, you know, and my passion for my craft and the difference that my company is trying to make in and around London.
And I'm
Yeah,
always
I
happy
have
to share
yes.
information. Sorry, Alexandra.
Sorry, Simon wrote another question for you, Thor.
Okay.
What lesson have you learned from this in terms of managing PR when public criticism is involved? Great insight for other businesses owner.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. And again, Simon, I did read your other comment as well that you mentioned on congratulating me on the handling of being in the spotlight. But yeah, I mean, what lessons have I learned from this? Less is more, for sure. You know, you don't have to respond to absolutely everybody. It's a very dangerous world when you try and react to critics, because how they feel today is definitely not how they're going to feel tomorrow. You know, and once you become a keyboard warrior, you'll probably find it really frustrating to sleep at night. I've actually learned that from early on, so I've got quite a lot of personal social media. I've got quite a big social media following personally on my personal profile. So I get all sorts of criticism. I think I've got about 18,000 followers now on my personal Instagram. So I know what it's like to have attention, the right attention, and I also know what it's like to have the wrong attention. But definitely less is more. You don't have to respond to everybody. Everybody's going to have an opinion anyway, you know. So that was one. Two, trust. For me, like I truly trust my beliefs and I trust the people that I work with. Like trust is a huge thing here for my organization and our clients, you know. So I very much trust is a benchmark for me. So when it comes to this sort of stuff, when you know it may seem like you're in a crisis, I trust the process, I trust my team, I take my time. Not everything needs to be responded to right now. Sometimes it's worth sleeping on it. That works for me. I never respond to something. Rarely does something need to be responded to right now. Like rarely. You know, even if you get summoned to court, they still give you sort of 7 to 14 days to respond, you know. So I tend to just sleep on it. So I hope those three insights help you. Hopefully you never ever have to come up with a potential PR nightmare like I walked into with that. But if you do, you know, one, give me a call. I'm really approachable. I'm here to help, here to be a soundboard for you. But those are the three things, my three biggest takeaways from the Banksy tree spotlight as such.
Amazing. Maybe I would like to ask James if he ever had to face criticism, not maybe in this like Banksy big event, but maybe something you would want to mention.
Well, I mentioned briefly about the pear trees in my presentation. I remember sitting in my car in the borough, listening to a very popular radio show, and a caller called in and said something. A resident said something to the effect of, "And they just drive around with these big noisy machines, and they just seem to be chopping things down wherever they go." And the radio presenter went, "Yes, yes, they do." And so I remember sitting there thinking, almost biting my fingers off, thinking, "What? We can't even reply to that." And I understand why the council did that. I'm not criticising the council from that point of view. They have to control things, and they will have responded, but it won't have been an instant respond. It would have been a reply, a generalised kind of considered response to that. But the radio presenter was agreeing with this obvious nonsense. I mean, nobody just drives around randomly cutting things down. But this was the conversation that was being had, and I didn't take it personally, but at the same time, it's very frustrating. And I think that's part of the reason why I felt able and wanted to add some comments for context when I saw the LinkedIn posts about this Banksy tree, and the people who obviously didn't know anything about trees were commenting about their opinions on how things looked. And I felt that it was important because I knew that the team at Islington would not be able to say anything about it. And this has happened in other boroughs. It's not just about Islington, but there are tree officers. It's the tree officers lot. You don't get any credit. You don't get any. You have to take the grief, and you're not able to explain. You are sometimes, but you're not able to explain fully in a sort of a difficult situation where it is a bit of a media storm. It's very difficult to get that side of the story out and to get a balanced response out. So I've a few experiences, but I'm old enough now to not be so worried about them.
It's very rare. I mean, look, could you imagine if every single time a tree officer did a good job, they got a letter or an email? It just wouldn't happen, would it? So
no.
Bad stuff always flies through a lot quicker than what good stuff. Like they do. Everybody does. Imagine it's almost like the postman. I mean, you don't congratulate the postman every single time he puts a letter in the letterbox. I think Mario Balotelli said that once. But you'll get an angry letter or an angry complaint if he doesn't put something in the letterbox that wasn't supposed to happen. So yeah, it's quite something, isn't it?
That is true, and people react to negative things, and when we did get compliments and thank yous, but they're not that rare. You do get them, but of course they're not a story. They're nice, and it's lovely when people do. They write in to thank you when you've arranged the planting of a tree for them, and that kind of thing. Or you've been dealing with a situation and they are pleased with the outcome. That does happen, but in fairness, in my experience, more often than not, it was a negative communication, and so you can't take that personally. But it's just hopefully trying to help educate people, not just the tenants and residents, but everybody really, because people don't necessarily, and it is true in all walks of life, people don't necessarily understand all of the information behind the headline, if you like, or what's drawn their attention is normally a much bigger story than that.
Yeah, there is a question from Chris for you, Thor. Has the publicity impacted your business, and getting more business or less, or no difference?
I haven't. It's really difficult to tell. I mean, I've had people reach out to me saying, "I've seen you in the news," and or someone saying, or every now and again a client. I'm not really too B2C client facing anymore. I'm more sort of leading the business to business or sort of commercial client relationships at the moment. That's my main part of my role, is to work on the biz dev of that side of the organization. And to be honest with you, I think it's going to be a tough one to know just yet, because it's still fresh. Our clients don't come around every single day. It's not like we're not like the place where you get your milk every week. People use us once every couple of years, maybe once every 3 years. So I'm hoping and I trust that, you know, we haven't, you know, handled this in a negative way. I'm a very positive leader. I always lead with positivity and I'm optimistic. So my leadership style will say, absolutely not. Don't worry. It will be absolutely fine. Everybody's all good. And you're going to get those odd people and odd tree surgeons that are going to say, Thor has no idea what he's talking about. You know, they're a silly company and X, Y, and Z and everything in between. But I trust that those that mind don't matter and those that matter don't mind. That's normally how I normally approach these sorts of things. So no, but in answer to your question, I haven't seen a dip in business. Business is still great. We're still growing. We're still on in line to meet our quarterly targets as well as our annual targets. I literally just finished off our annual strategy yesterday. And all KPIs are pointing in the direction that we're still moving in the direction that we wish that we're choosing to go down. So business is still good at the moment. We're still looking for more clients. Don't get me wrong, we can always do with more. And me being who I am, being the CEO of the organization, I always want more because that's just my default. But for now, business seems to be really good. Morale seems to be really good at the company, and we're still on track to meet our annual goals.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. That's great. And Chris also apologized for arriving late and wanted to clarification. Do we not know the reason for the work? If not, perhaps a freedom of information request would be in order and in the public interest?
Well, I mean, we can. I mean, it's, to my mind, I think we've sort of covered the reasons for the work. Excuse me. I don't think it's a contentious reason for the work. We know that the tree has decay at the base. We know that it's been pruned in the past, reduced in the past several times. We can see from the images on the Google Street View that it's been pruned every few years, and so it's being managed in its location and considering its condition. And I don't think there's anything more to it than that, to be honest with you. It's interesting to note that, and I'm not 100% certain of this, but it may well have been that the tree was only first reduced after the initial damage caused by the vandalism that was done. The tree was previously managed, certainly. It was irregularly inspected, and when necessary, it was pruned. But I think the initial reduction may have been the response to the damage that was done to the tree. But that was, again, many years ago. I don't even remember exactly what year. It was years before I left Islington, and I left Islington 10 years ago. So, it may well be that caused the initial pruning. And I think I don't know how much we've discussed about this, but when you initially reduce the crown of a tree, in most cases you're going to have to do that cyclically because of the way the tree will grow back and the regrowth becomes heavier and potentially can be more poorly attached and may fail in winds and that kind of thing, particularly in the urban environment. Use the crown of a tree, it becomes a cyclical maintenance operation. And as I say, I think all the reasons that we've hypothesized as to why the tree was pruned, it's very likely to be a combination of those factors. And I don't think it's not something that would be hidden or secret. It's kind of a normal maintenance situation.
Thank you, James. I hope it's clear now for Chris. And I have no more questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. So maybe if you want to say last words for this topic, and we are getting near to 2-hour webinar. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah.
Well, go on. Sorry.
I'll just end on just saying thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to speak on behalf of my organisation. James, thank you for an awesome keynote thoroughly enjoyed that. The detail that you went into some of that stuff, and it was really engaging, really educating. And I'm definitely gonna push out for everyone in my organisation to watch that, because I thought it was quite insightful and quite educating. So I genuinely appreciate it. And if anybody, short plug, if anybody does require any sort of expert tree care or consultancy, or even just a little bit of advice, or is looking for a contractor to represent their borough, organisation or business, please don't hesitate to consider Thor's Trees to be your chosen contractor. I'd love to be able to help you guys with all your arboricultural service and needs.
That's great. And thank you for your kind words there, Lawrence. It was very nice to have a discussion with you about it. Thank you very much to Alexandra and to Andre for organising this webinar. And thank you to all of the attendees. I hope it's been interesting. And yes, I'm grateful that you have taken the time to listen. And thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to thank you both for sharing your perspective on this topic and your experience. It was a very great session. So thank you so much for making your time to spend it with us here today. And now I would like to end it with an invitation for our already 6th webinar. So if you enjoyed today's session, we already have planned our next with Giovanni Morelli and Valentino Cristini on July 30th. So if you want to register, I will now share a link to the chat, and it is first time sharing this link. We will be releasing it in next days or week. So I would be very happy to see everyone next time also. And don't worry if you haven't made it to the beginning of the webinar, we will be having recording. So if you would want to share it, don't forget to follow us on social media. We will be sharing it for sure. So yeah, I'm very happy to see you here, everyone. And yeah, excited for more upcoming webinars together.
Thank you very much. I've already registered for the next one.
Thank you. Perfect.
It's great. Great to see you.
Great to see
Thanks,
you.
guys. Take
Thank
care.
you.
See you later. Take care.
Thank you.